My sister looked me dead in the eye in the middle of a crowded restaurant and told me the greatest wedding gift I could ever give her was to disappear from this family forever. My mother looked away. My father nodded in agreement. So I did exactly that. But after selling the house out from under them and canceling every single wedding vendor, what I left sitting in the middle of their empty dining room completely shattered their world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Gwen, 33 years old, and working as a senior financial auditor in Chicago. I thought I had learned to navigate the toxic dynamics of my family, but nothing could have prepared me for the tasting dinner for my younger sister's upcoming wedding. We were sitting in a private alcove at one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The table was covered in half-eaten plates of Wagyu beef, imported truffles, and empty bottles of vintage champagne. Savannah, my 29-year-old sister, was glowing with the smug satisfaction she wore so well. She had just finished a lengthy speech about the intricate details of her perfect wedding. Her fiancé Trey, a brilliant software sales director who was African American and one of the most genuinely hardworking men I had ever met, had stepped away to take an urgent phone call from a client. He was completely blind to the financial toxicity that ran deep in my family. That left just my parents, Savannah, and me at the table. That is when the waiter approached holding a black leather folder. He bypassed my father Thomas, who was busy swirling the last drop of a $200 wine in his glass, and placed the folder directly in front of me. I opened the folder. The total at the bottom of the receipt read $4,500. I stared at the numbers, letting the absolute absurdity of the moment sink in. $4,500 for a single meal. I looked across the table at my mother, Brenda. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us as she casually adjusted her diamond earrings. She did not even blink. "Go ahead and put your card down, Gwen," she said smoothly, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. "Savannah needs to save her money right now. She and Trey are finalizing their honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, and those overwater bungalows are outrageously expensive. Family helps family, you know that." I closed the leather folder and pushed it slowly toward the center of the table. "I am not paying for this," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "I came here tonight to taste the menu, not to foot the bill for a private feast that I did not even order." My father slammed his hand flat against the heavy mahogany table, making the silverware rattle loudly. "Do not start this right now, Gwen," he warned, his voice low and threatening. "You have a fantastic salary as an auditor. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. Paying for a celebration dinner is the least you can do to support your sister. No real responsibilities." I repeated, feeling the familiar cold anger pooling in my chest. "You mean aside from the $15,000 venue deposit I paid just last month because Savannah claimed her credit cards were completely maxed out? Or the florist retainer she begged me to cover 2 weeks ago because she absolutely needed imported orchids? I have funded half this wedding already while you and Mom have contributed absolutely nothing but opinions." Savannah scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically as she crossed her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "You are a financial auditor, Gwen. You literally look at spreadsheets and bank accounts all day long. You make 6 figures and do absolutely nothing with your money. It is just a dinner. Stop acting like we are bankrupting you. You are making yourself look so cheap, and it is honestly embarrassing to watch." My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on that toxic, condescending tone she had perfected over 3 decades of making me the family scapegoat. "Savannah is the bride. This is her time to shine, and you are trying to ruin it with your usual negativity. You should be honored that we even invited you to share this luxury experience. It is not our fault you are 33 and single. Do not take your bitter jealousy out on your sister just because she is building a beautiful, successful life with a wonderful man and you are entirely alone." I looked at the 3 of them. The people who had spent my entire life taking my money, my time, and my sanity, all while treating me like a walking automated teller machine that doubled as an emotional punching bag. Every accomplishment of mine was ignored while every extravagant whim of Savannah's was funded by my hard work and quiet sacrifices. I reached into my designer purse, but instead of pulling out my premium credit card, I pulled out my car keys. I gripped the cool metal tightly in my palm, feeling the sharp edges press against my skin. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said calmly, rising from my chair and looking down at them. Savannah is the bride, so the bride and her generous parents can figure out how to pay for their own imported truffles. Have a lovely evening. Savannah's face turned a violent shade of red. She shot up from her seat so fast that her elbow clipped her crystal champagne flute. The glass shattered violently against the table, sending expensive champagne pouring over the white linen tablecloth and splashing directly onto my mother's designer dress. The sharp, explosive sound of breaking glass echoed loudly through the quiet restaurant. Conversations at nearby tables stopped instantly as dozens of affluent patrons turned their heads to stare at our private alcove. Savannah did not care about the audience. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger mere inches from my face, her chest heaving with uncontrolled rage as she glared at me. "You are a miserable, bitter spinster who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." Savannah hissed, her voice vibrating with malice that cut through the sudden silence of the dining room. "You think just because you have a boring corporate job and some money saved up, you can control me. You think you can hold a few venue deposits over my head and suddenly play the victim. Let me make something crystal clear for you, Gwen. The only reason we even invite you to these things is because Mom and Dad feel sorry for you. But if you want to know what I really want..." She leaned in closer, her eyes flashing with absolute venom. "The greatest wedding gift is for you to disappear from this family forever." The words hung in the chilling air between us. The surrounding tables were completely quiet now, every patron pretending to look at their menus while hanging on to every syllable of my sister's tantrum. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Savannah. Instead, I slowly turned my gaze to our mother. I waited for Brenda to do what any normal mother would do. I waited for her to scold Savannah for the outburst, to tell her that she had gone too far, to insist that family does not speak to family that way. But Brenda did none of those things. My mother simply reached for her cloth napkin, dabbed at the spilled champagne on her dress, and deliberately turned her head away, refusing to look at me. She stared blankly at a painting on the far wall, completely abandoning me to Savannah's cruelty, just as she had done my entire life. I shifted my gaze to my father, the patriarch, who always demanded respect and unity. Thomas let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his suit jacket with a look of profound irritation. He did not look angry at Savannah for her vicious words. He looked angry at me for provoking her. "Gwen, just stop ruining your sister's mood," he muttered, shaking his head. "Savannah has been under a tremendous amount of stress planning this wedding. She does not need your attitude tonight. Just pay the bill and let us salvage what is left of this evening. You are acting incredibly immature." I stood there for a long moment. A younger version of me would have crumbled. A younger version of me would have felt the familiar hot sting of tears welling up in my eyes, desperate for their approval, desperate to apologize, just to restore the peace. I would have begged them to love me, handing over my credit card while swallowing my pride just to avoid being cast out. But standing in that upscale restaurant, looking at the three people who shared my blood but possessed none of my loyalty, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional well had finally run dry. There was no sadness left, no rejection to fear. Savannah had just handed me the exact permission I needed to execute a plan I had been holding back on for years. They wanted me to disappear. They thought my absence would be a punishment, a tragic exile for the lonely, unloved older sister. They had no idea that my disappearance would be the catalyst for their absolute financial ruin. I reached back into my designer purse. I did not pull out a tissue to wipe away non-existent tears. I pulled out my sleek, heavy metal premium credit card. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight, the tangible proof of the success I had built entirely on my own, while they mocked my career choices. I placed the card down on the leather check presenter with a sharp, definitive clack that echoed over the table. The waiter, who had been hovering nervously near a pillar, hurried over to process the transaction. I did not say a word as he swiped it, handed me the receipt, and offered a sympathetic nod. I signed my name with a steady hand, leaving a generous tip for the staff, who had to endure my family's disgraceful behavior. I picked up my purse and looked back at my family one last time. Savannah was already smiling, victorious, believing She had put me back in my proper place as the obedient family wallet. Brenda finally looked at me, a smug expression settling on her features now that the bill was covered. Thomas went back to his wine, satisfied that order had been restored. I looked Savannah dead in the eye. My voice was calm, devoid of any anger or malice, carrying only the chilling certainty of a promise. "Your wedding gift will be delivered exactly as requested," I said. Before any of them could respond or process the finality in my tone, I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not rush. I walked through the elegant dining room with my head held high, my posture straight, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the Chicago night. The city was alive with flashing lights, the roar of traffic, and the distant sound of sirens, but my mind was completely silent, focused entirely on the immediate future. I walked to the valet stand, handed over my ticket, and waited for my luxury sedan. When the attendant brought my car around, I tipped him generously, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet sanctuary of the leather interior. I sat there in the parking lot with the engine running. I did not rest my head against the steering wheel to cry. I did not call a friend to vent about the betrayal. I did not need comfort. I needed execution. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. I swiped past my text messages, past the family group chat that I would soon delete entirely, and bypassed my social media apps. Instead, I opened a heavily encrypted folder on my home screen. It required a facial recognition scan and a complex passcode to unlock. The app loaded, displaying a highly confidential real estate portfolio. This was my hidden empire, the secret wealth I had meticulously built and managed entirely out of sight from my greedy, entitled family. I tapped on the primary property listing. A massive, beautiful suburban estate located in a highly desirable neighborhood. The exact estate my parents currently lived in. The exact estate they believed was their lifelong home. My finger hovered over the contact button for my exclusive corporate real estate broker, preparing to set off an explosion that would burn their perfect, arrogant lives completely to the ground. I pressed the contact button, sending an encrypted message to my broker. The instructions were simple. Prepare liquidation documents for the suburban estate. I will initiate an expedited cash sale tomorrow morning. I locked my phone and pulled out of the parking lot. The drive back took 40 minutes, giving me time to appreciate the silence. I felt no guilt, no anxiety, and no desire to fix the relationships I was leaving behind. Savannah demanded I disappear. I would grant her wish with surgical precision. I turned onto our street and pulled into the sprawling driveway. The property boasted a main house, manicured gardens, and a detached guest house. That guest house was my sanctuary for 6 years. I lived quietly out of their way, while they lived like royalty. I parked near my spot, stepping into the cool night air. I just wanted to pack a bag and head to my downtown penthouse to begin the final phase. Before I could reach into my purse for keys, harsh headlights washed over the driveway. My parents' luxury sport utility vehicle pulled in fast, braking sharply inches from my bumper. The heavy doors swung open. Thomas and Brenda stepped out, faces illuminated by the security lights I had installed 2 years ago. They evidently left the restaurant right after me, but they had not rushed back to offer an apology for Savannah's cruel behavior. Their aggressive posture made it clear they were here to deliver a verdict. "Gwen, stop right there!" Thomas barked, slamming his car door shut. He marched across the paved driveway, loosening his silk tie. "We need to talk about your living arrangements, and we are going to do it right now." I turned around slowly, folding my arms across my chest. I watched them approach, observing their absolute lack of self-awareness. "What about my living arrangements, Dad?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of human emotion. Brenda stepped forward, taking her place beside him. She looked at the beautiful guest house standing behind me, her critical eyes sweeping over the architecture before settling back on my face. "Your behavior tonight was the final straw, Gwen. You embarrassed your sister, you embarrassed us, and you made Trey uncomfortable. We have tried to be patient with your bitter attitude, but we can no longer allow your toxic energy to ruin Savannah's bright future." My mother adjusted her designer coat, lifting her chin with that signature arrogance she wielded like a weapon. Savannah and Trey are going to move into the main house immediately after the wedding. They deeply need the space to start their life together, to build a proper family. Trey has a highly respectable position as a software sales director, and Savannah absolutely deserves a home that reflects their combined success. Therefore, your father and I have decided it is only fair that you pack up your things and move out of the guest house by the end of the month. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of her statement. You are kicking me out of the guest house so Savannah can have the entire estate, I stated softly. It is the practical choice, Brenda continued, her tone incredibly patronizing. You are 33 years old and completely single. You have no husband, no prospects, and no children on the horizon. You do not need a massive 2-story guest house. Savannah wants to convert this building into a bridal preparation suite for her bridal party, and eventually she plans to use it as a private nursery when she and Trey have their children. You are just taking up valuable space here, Gwen. It is time for you to finally grow up, find an apartment downtown, and stop dragging this family down. The absolute delusion was breathtaking to behold. They stood on a driveway they did not own, aggressively pointing at a guest house. They did not pay for, trying to kick me off a vast property that legally belonged entirely to me. They were literally trying to evict their own landlord. Thomas stepped closer, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded stack of thick papers and a heavy silver fountain pen. We want this transition to be perfectly clean and legal, he stated, his voice laced with the fake authority he loved to project to the world. Since you have been handling the property tax paperwork and utilities for us all these years, Savannah's lawyer drafted a formal relinquishment of residency. It states that you are voluntarily vacating the premises and surrendering any tenant claims to the guest house or the main property. We are not going to let you hold those utility bills over our heads and claim you have a legal right to stay. He shoved the legal documents and the silver pen forcefully against my chest, demanding I take them immediately. Sign the papers, Gwen. Sign them right now. You will have exactly 4 weeks to clear out every single piece of your cheap furniture and hand the keys over to your sister. If you make this difficult, I will personally have the police escort you off our property. Do you understand me? I looked down at the documents resting in my hands. I read the bold heading, demanding I surrender my rights to the estate. I read the threatening clauses, demanding I vacate the premises to make way for the golden child. I thought about the absolute devastation they were going to feel when they realized who actually owned the ground they were standing on. I looked up at Thomas and my mother, Brenda. They stood tall, puffing their chests, waiting for me to break down, argue, or beg for my home. I did none of those things. I slowly uncapped the silver fountain pen. A chilling, empty smile spread slowly across my face as I looked directly into my father's incredibly demanding, arrogant eyes. I stared at the thick legal document resting in my hands. The paper felt heavy, carrying the weight of an absolute delusion that my parents had nurtured for the better part of a decade. Savannah's lawyer had apparently drafted this relinquishment of residency with complete confidence, citing Thomas and Brenda as the primary property owners. My father stood there, tapping his expensive leather shoe against the pavement, waiting for me to press the silver fountain pen to the signature line. I truly believed he held all the power. He truly believed this piece of paper meant something. As my eyes scanned the aggressive legal jargon, my mind drifted back exactly 6 years. The reality of this estate was a secret my parents had buried so deeply, they actually managed to forget the truth. 6 years ago, Thomas and Brenda experienced a catastrophic financial collapse. My father had made a series of reckless, arrogant investments, leveraging every single asset they possessed to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. The banks eventually came collecting. The foreclosure was brutal, swift, and entirely public. I remember the day the eviction notices were taped to the front door of the main house. Savannah was away at college, living off student loans my parents forced her to take while lying about their wealth. My mother spent weeks crying in her bedroom, terrified that her country club friends would discover she was completely bankrupt. I was 27 at the time, quietly climbing the corporate ladder as a financial auditor. I had lived frugally, invested aggressively, and amassed a significant portfolio entirely out of their sight. When the bank put this massive suburban estate up for auction, my parents were utterly helpless. They begged me to save their reputation. They begged me to prevent the ultimate social humiliation. So I stepped in. I liquidated a large portion of my investments, transferred the funds, and bought the estate in cash. I had paid the astronomical legal fees, settled their outstanding debts with local vendors, and shielded them from total ruin. I saved them from absolute ruin. On all legally binding municipal, state, and federal documents, I am the 100% sole owner of this property. My name is on the deed. My name is on the property tax records. My name is on the comprehensive insurance policies. Thomas and Brenda are nothing more than non-paying tenants. They do not pay rent. They do not pay for maintenance. I have subsidized their luxurious suburban fantasy for 6 solid years. Yet the human mind is a fascinating mechanism. Instead of experiencing gratitude, my parents immediately rewrote history. To protect their fragile egos, they convinced themselves that my financial intervention was merely a temporary family loan. They spun a wild narrative for Savannah and their social circle, claiming they simply restructured their assets for tax purposes and put the house in my name as a formality. Over time, that lie became their absolute truth. They genuinely forgot they were living on my charity. They attended their country club dinners, hosting lavish parties on the lawn, acting as if they were still the titans of the neighborhood. They pushed me into the backyard guest house, claiming I needed privacy for my accounting work, while they reclaimed the sprawling main house as their rightful kingdom. Now, looking at this ridiculous, legally void document, the irony was almost suffocating. My non-paying tenants were attempting to serve an eviction notice to their actual landlord. They wanted to force me off my own property so they could gift my land to the golden child. I slowly rolled the silver fountain pen between my fingers. The cap snapped back into place with a sharp metallic click. I held the document out, offering it back to my father. "I am not going to sign this," I said, my voice completely serene. My father's face contorted with instant rage. The veins in his neck strained against his tight collar. "You will sign it, Gwen," he demanded, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You do not dictate the terms in this family anymore. You are a guest on this property and your time is up." My mother crossed her arms, shaking her head with an exaggerated sigh of disappointment. "Do not make this a legal battle, Gwen. You know you cannot afford to fight your father in court. Just accept that your sister needs the space. Do not be so utterly selfish." I did not back away. I kept my chilling smile perfectly intact, absorbing their misplaced aggression. I handed the unsigned papers back to Thomas, forcing him to take them. "You misunderstand me," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I am not refusing to leave. You and Savannah want me out of the guest house. You want me to disappear from the property. I completely agree with you. It is time for a major transition. I will not sign your lawyer's paperwork because it is entirely unnecessary. I will pack my belongings. I will be completely out of this guest house and off this property well before the end of the month. You and Savannah can have exactly what you deserve." Thomas and Brenda visibly relaxed, the aggressive tension leaving their shoulders. They exchanged a victorious look. They thought my refusal to sign was just a last pathetic attempt to preserve my dignity before submitting to their ultimate authority. They thought they had won. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason," my father said, adjusting his suit jacket with a smug, triumphant smirk. "Have your boxes packed by next weekend. We want to start painting the guest house before the wedding." I gave them a slow, measured nod, turned around, and walked to the front door of my guest house. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside the quiet space, and firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The moment the latch clicked into place, the smile dropped from my face, replaced by cold, calculated focus. I walked straight to my home office desk, dropped my purse on the floor, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room, reflecting the absolute determination in my eyes. I opened my encrypted email client. I did not search for moving companies. I did not look for storage units. I opened a new message window and typed in the private contact address for Vanguard Acquisitions. They were a notorious aggressive cash home buyer syndicate operating heavily in the Chicago area. In the real estate auditing world, they were infamous. They did not care about home inspections, they did not care about interior conditions, and they certainly did not care about existing occupants. They bought premium lots for straight cash, bulldozed the existing structures, and built highly profitable luxury condominiums. Their most famous business tactic was their ruthless, immediate eviction process for anyone occupying the properties they purchased. They employed specialized corporate lawyers who executed 30-day notices to quit with absolute merciless efficiency. My fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting the email with swift professional precision. I attached the verified deed, the property tax records, and the satellite layout of the entire estate. I requested an immediate off-market cash sale. I made my terms incredibly clear. I wanted a fast closing, zero contingencies, and I authorized them to handle the removal of all current residents with extreme prejudice. I hit send, watching the progress bar complete the delivery. The destruction of my family's fabricated reality was now officially in motion. I woke up the next morning feeling a profound sense of clarity. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere that had haunted my time in the guest house was completely gone. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop to review my corporate auditing schedules for the day. My mind was sharp, entirely focused on the intricate financial structures I dismantled and analyzed for a living. I was a professional at detecting fraud, identifying anomalies, and holding greedy executives accountable. I simply had never applied those professional skills to my own blood relatives until now. At precisely 9 o'clock, my phone vibrated intensely against the granite countertop. It was an automated high-priority fraud alert from my primary banking institution. I picked up the device expecting a routine security check regarding an overseas software subscription or a flagged corporate travel expense. Instead, the notification highlighted a massive pending transaction on a specific account I rarely monitored. It was the Platinum Emergency Credit Card. My eyes narrowed as I tapped the notification to view the full transaction details. I had issued that specific card to my mother 3 years ago, under incredibly strict conditions. Brenda had come to me crying about a sudden spike in her blood pressure and claimed she urgently needed to see an out-of-network cardiovascular specialist. She fed me a tearful, desperate story about how her and my father's asset restructuring left them temporarily lacking liquid cash for unexpected medical copays. I gave her the card with one absolute rule. It was for health emergencies, pharmacy runs, and necessary medical deductibles only. I set the limit generously high because I never wanted my parents to panic over a genuine health crisis. Apparently, my mother considered funding her golden child's vanity to be a life-or-death medical emergency. The pending charge blaring on my screen was for exactly $8,000. The merchant listed was not a hospital. It was not a specialized clinic. The merchant was L'Etoile Blanche, an ultra-exclusive appointment-only bridal boutique located in the most expensive shopping district of downtown Chicago. It was the kind of boutique that required a non-refundable deposit just to walk through the front doors and try on sample gowns. I set my coffee mug down. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the theft was almost impressive. Less than 12 hours ago, my family had tried to legally evict me from my own property. Less than 12 hours ago, Savannah had screamed that her ultimate wedding gift would be my permanent disappearance. And yet here they were, merrily swiping my emergency medical credit card to purchase a designer wedding dress. They truly believed I was nothing more than a mindless, bottomless vault designed to fund their delusions of grandeur. A lesser person might have immediately called the bank to report the fraud and cancel the transaction from the comfort of their kitchen. But calling the bank would only result in a declined card. My mother would likely act confused, pretend it was a bank error, and try to manipulate her way out of the embarrassment. I did not want to give them the luxury of a quiet decline. I wanted them to feel the exact same public humiliation they had inflicted on me at the restaurant the night before. I closed my laptop and sent a brief message to my corporate team, delegating my morning audits to my junior associates. I walked to my closet, pulled out a tailored designer blazer, and slipped on my sharpest heels. If I was going to crash a luxury bridal appointment, I was going to look like the wealthy financial auditor. I actually was not the pathetic spinster sister they constantly portrayed me to be. I grabbed my car keys and walked out to my sedan. The drive downtown took 30 minutes, but my mind worked with terrifying speed the entire way. I calculated the exact timeline of their morning. Savannah and Brenda must have booked this VIP appointment months in advance. They had probably been planning to manipulate my father into paying for the dress, but after the disastrous dinner last night, they likely realized his credit lines were completely tapped out. So Brenda reached into her designer purse and pulled out the emergency plastic I had trusted her with, assuming I would be too intimidated by their threats of eviction to ever confront them about the charge. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I pulled into a premium parking garage directly across from the boutique. The exterior of L'Etoile Blanche was imposing, featuring floor-to-ceiling frosted glass, gold velvet curtains, and a discreet security guard standing by the elegant entrance. I walked up to the heavy glass doors, bypassed the guard with a confident nod, and pushed my way inside. The interior smelled of fresh lilies and expensive perfume. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Plush white sofas were arranged around massive gilded mirrors. The atmosphere was designed to make entitled brides feel like absolute royalty. I stood near the reception desk, my eyes scanning the private viewing pedestals. It did not take long to spot them. In the center of the largest viewing area, standing on a circular velvet pedestal, was Savannah. She was wearing a massive, heavily beaded designer gown, featuring layers of imported silk and a sweeping cathedral train. She was twisting back and forth, admiring her reflection in the mirrors with absolute adoration. Sitting on a velvet sofa facing the pedestal was my mother. Brenda looked the picture of wealthy, suburban bliss. She had a custom boutique shopping bag resting at her feet, likely filled with overpriced veils and accessories. A bridal consultant hovered nearby, fawning over Savannah and adjusting the intricate lace on the gown. The consultant stepped back and signaled to another employee, who immediately brought over a silver tray carrying 2 tall crystal flutes filled with sparkling liquid. The attendant handed one flute to Savannah and the other to Brenda. I walked slowly across the plush carpet, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood trim of the viewing area. I stopped just outside their line of sight, standing completely still in the shadows of a massive floral arrangement. I watched my mother raise her crystal flute toward the ceiling. Savannah beamed, raising her own glass in response. I stepped directly into the bright lights of the viewing area, right as they clinked their glasses together, toasting to the perfect dress. "Toasting to the perfect dress," Savannah declared, holding her crystal flute high. "That is a beautiful sentiment for a dress you cannot afford," I said. My voice sliced through the serene classical music playing overhead. Savannah froze. Her champagne flute stopped midway to her lips. Brenda spun around so fast she nearly dropped her own glass. The color drained completely from my mother's face as she stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The bridal consultant stepped back, looking nervously between the three of us. I did not wait for my family to compose themselves. I walked straight past their viewing pedestal and headed directly toward the mahogany reception desk, where the boutique manager was currently processing the payment. She looked up with a polite, professional smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level and authoritative. "I am the primary account holder for the Platinum card you just swiped for an $8,000 transaction. I need you to cancel that payment immediately. The card was stolen, and this is an unauthorized fraudulent charge." The manager's eyes widened in alarm. She immediately pulled her hands away from the payment terminal. "Ma'am, are you sure the older lady over there presented the card just moments ago?" "I am absolutely certain," I replied, pulling out my driver's license to verify my identity. "I issued that specific card solely for medical emergencies. The woman who handed it to you is attempting to commit credit card fraud to purchase a wedding gown. Cancel the transaction right now, or I will have my corporate legal team involve the authorities." The manager did not hesitate. She rapidly typed on her keyboard, hitting the necessary keystrokes to void the authorization. The machine printed a long red cancellation receipt. Over by the velvet pedestal, the reality of the situation finally registered. Savannah lowered her arms, the heavy silk and beaded lace of the gown, suddenly looking like a borrowed costume rather than a royal garment. The bridal realizing her massive commission had just evaporated, stepped away from Savannah and crossed her arms. Several other brides and their families in adjacent viewing areas turned to watch the spectacle. Brenda finally found her voice. She slammed her crystal flute down on a side table and marched across the plush carpet toward the reception desk. Her face was contorted with absolute fury. "Gwen, what on earth do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the frosted glass walls. "You are making a massive scene in front of these lovely people. Tell the manager to process the payment immediately. We had an agreement." "We had no such agreement, Mom," I said, turning to face her fully. "I gave you that emergency card 3 years ago when you claimed you needed a cardiovascular specialist. A designer wedding gown is not a medical emergency. You stole my financial information because you and Thomas are entirely broke, and you thought you could quietly manipulate me into funding Savannah's vanity." Savannah stepped off the pedestal. The heavy train of the gown dragged awkwardly behind her. She looked around the boutique, taking in the judgmental stares of the staff and the whispering from the other wealthy patrons. Her face burned red with absolute humiliation. She had spent the last 2 hours acting like a billionaire heiress, treating the bridal staff like her personal servants, only to be publicly exposed as a fraud who could not even afford her own dress. "Gwen, you cannot do this to me!" Savannah cried out, her voice cracking. "I need this dress. The alterations are already planned. You are ruining my entire wedding experience. I am simply stopping a theft." "Savannah," I replied coldly. "If you want the dress, you can pay for it with your own money." "Oh wait, you cannot, because you do not have any." Brenda lunged forward, her hands balled into tight fists. "You are a cold-blooded monster!" she screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her refined suburban facade. "How can you be so vicious to your own sister? We let you live on our property. We tolerate your miserable presence. And this is how you repay us, by humiliating us in public." "You are sick, Gwen. You are deeply, deeply sick." I did not flinch at her screaming. I simply stared at her, absorbing her toxic rage without a single ounce of reaction. I looked past her shoulder to the velvet sofa where she had been sitting. Her expensive designer purse sat open, and resting right on top of her wallet was my platinum credit card. I walked past my screaming mother, approached the sofa, and calmly reached into her bag. "Hey," Brenda shouted, rushing back toward me. "Get your hands out of my purse. That is private property." I pulled the physical card out, holding it up for her to see, before slipping it safely into my own blazer pocket. "It is my property," I corrected her. "And your access to my funds is permanently revoked." Savannah burst into loud, hysterical tears, sinking down onto the velvet sofa in her unpaid gown. The boutique manager signaled for the security guard, clearly ready to ask my mother and sister to leave the premises. I had accomplished exactly what I came to do. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and walked out the front doors of the boutique, leaving the two of them to face the consequences of their own actions. The bright morning sun hit my face as I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk. I felt a tremendous surge of adrenaline. The first chain of the domino effect had officially fallen. I crossed the street and walked into the parking garage, my mind already calculating the next phase of the liquidation process. As I rounded the corner toward my parked sedan, I suddenly collided with a tall, solid figure. I stumbled backward, catching my balance just in time. "Whoa, I am so sorry," a deep voice said. I looked up and found myself standing face to face with Trey. He was dressed in a sharp professional suit, holding an enormous, expensive bouquet of white roses and lilies. He looked incredibly handsome and successful, exactly the kind of man Savannah wanted to show off to her friends. But right now, Trey did not look happy. He looked utterly bewildered. "Gwen," Trey asked, recognizing me. "What are you doing here? I thought you were working." I adjusted my blazer quickly, regaining my composure. "I had a quick errand to run," I said smoothly. "I assume those flowers are to celebrate Savannah finding her dress." Trey looked down at the massive bouquet in his hands, then pulled his phone out of his pocket. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Yeah, they were supposed to be. I wanted to surprise her. But my phone has been blowing up for the last 2 minutes. Savannah just sent me a dozen frantic text messages." He looked away from his screen and met my eyes, his expression shifting from confusion to serious concern. "Gwen, What is going on? Savannah is crying hysterically. She just texted me that you showed up at the boutique, ambushed them, and now you are actively trying to bankrupt her and your parents. Why would she say you are trying to bankrupt them? I stood there in the dimly lit parking garage, looking at the man who was about to marry into my deeply toxic, financially fraudulent family. The second domino was ready to fall. I looked at the massive bouquet of white roses and lilies in Trey's hands. He was a genuinely good man. He was incredibly hardworking, entirely self-made, and deeply loyal. He did not deserve to become collateral damage in my family's relentless cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. There is a quiet coffee shop right across the street, I said, gesturing toward the exit of the concrete parking garage. Buy me a black coffee, Trey. We need to have a very honest conversation, and I guarantee it will be the most important one you have before your wedding day. Trey hesitated for a fraction of a second. His phone vibrated again in his hand, displaying yet another frantic message from Savannah, but his logical instincts clearly overrode her emotional panic. He gave a sharp nod, lowered his phone, and followed me out into the bright Chicago morning. We walked in silence to a high-end espresso bar on the corner. The interior was sleek and minimalist, filled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. We found a secluded booth near the back windows. Trey gently placed the extravagant bouquet on the empty chair beside him. He ordered my black coffee and a cappuccino for himself, paying with his phone before sitting across from me. He folded his hands on the table, his posture tight and defensive. I am a straightforward guy. Trey began, his voice low and serious. I direct software sales for enterprise clients. I deal in hard data, clear contracts, and verified facts. Right now, the facts I have been given do not align with the woman sitting in front of me. I need to understand why my fiancé is currently sobbing in a bridal boutique, claiming her sister just tried to bankrupt her. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. Tell me exactly what Savannah has told you about my financial situation. I want to hear her exact narrative. Trey let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his closely cropped hair. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but his desire for the truth pushed him forward. Savannah told me that you are drowning in a mountain of bad debt. She said you made some terrible investments in your 20s and never recovered. According to her, Thomas and Brenda let you live in their backyard guest house, completely rent-free, because they feel sorry for you. She told me you are deeply insecure and wildly jealous that she is getting married first. She said your actions today were just a desperate, spiteful attempt to ruin her happiness because you cannot fix your own life. I listened to every single word. I did not interrupt him. I did not raise my voice in defensive anger. I did not launch into a passionate speech about the decades of emotional abuse, the blatant favoritism, or the way my parents had systematically treated me like an invisible bank vault. I remained perfectly composed. As a senior financial auditor, I knew that emotional outbursts only weakened your position during a negotiation. I spoke his language instead. I spoke in verified documentation. Savannah chose her partner very well, I thought to myself. Trey was protective, financially stable, and deeply honorable. He was the absolute perfect host for a family of relentless parasites. Trey, I said calmly, setting my coffee mug down on the wooden table. I am not going to argue with Savannah's emotional narrative. I am not going to sit here and try to convince you that I am a good sister or a victim of their cruelty. I am a financial auditor. I deal exclusively in documented reality, so I am going to let the documentation speak entirely for itself. I reached into my structured designer tote bag. I bypassed the platinum emergency credit card I had just confiscated from my mother. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a single heavily folded piece of premium stock paper. It was a document I always carried with me as part of my financial records. I placed it face down on the table between us. Savannah told you that Thomas and Brenda are paying for this entire wedding, correct? I asked. Trey nodded, his eyes fixed on the folded paper. Yes. Thomas sat me down in his study a month ago. He shook my hand and told me that money was no object. He said Savannah was his golden girl, and he was taking care of the venue, the catering, and the dress. He explicitly told me not to worry about a single expense. I gave a short, humorless laugh. My father is an exceptional storyteller. Go ahead and open the paper, Trey. Read it carefully. Trey reached across the table and picked up the document. He unfolded it. It was the official legally binding contract and receipt for their luxury wedding venue in downtown Chicago. His eyes scanned the heavy black text, reading the dates, the incredibly strict cancellation clauses, and the itemized list of premium services Savannah had demanded for her reception. Then his eyes drifted down to the bottom of the page, settling on the payment confirmation and the signature line. I watched the exact moment his reality began to fracture. I watched his brow furrow as his brain tried to process the impossible information sitting right in front of his face. The total deposit paid last month was $15,000. But the name printed on the receipt was not Thomas. It was not Brenda. The signature on the primary guarantor line belonged solely to me. "This is your name," Trey whispered, looking up at me with profound shock in his eyes. "You paid the $15,000 deposit. You are the sole guarantor for the entire venue." I paid the venue deposit. I confirmed, my voice steady and completely unapologetic. I also paid the $3,000 floral retainer 2 weeks ago. That credit card your fiancé just tried to use at the bridal boutique. That is my personal emergency medical card. My parents do not have a cent to their names. They are completely bankrupt, Trey. I have been funding the illusion of their massive wealth for 6 years. I own the guest house. I own the main house. They are nothing but my non-paying tenants, and they have been lying to you since the moment you shook my father's hand. Trey dropped the contract onto the table as if it had physically burned him. The blood drained from his face. He looked out the window of the coffee shop, staring blankly at the busy Chicago street, watching his entire future with Savannah collapse into a terrifying pile of financial lies and deceit. He was a smart man. He immediately understood that if they could lie to him with such ease about something this massive, there was absolutely no telling what else they were hiding. I stood up from the booth, smoothing out my tailored blazer. I did not ask for the venue receipt back. He needed to keep it. He needed to hold the physical proof of their betrayal. "I am leaving the property and severing all ties with my family," I said, looking down at him. "I am giving you the truth because you are an honest man who walked blindly into a trap. Do whatever you want with this information. But I will give you one final piece of professional advice before I disappear." Trey looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely silent, waiting for my next words. "Run a deep, comprehensive credit check on your fiancé before you even think about signing a legally binding marriage license," I warned him, my tone utterly serious. "Look at her debts. Look at her actual assets. Do not become their next victim, Trey." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him sitting alone at the table with my $15,000 receipt and his useless bouquet of white flowers. The warning had been delivered. The truth was out. The third domino had just been pushed. The morning air felt crisp as I walked to my car, leaving the coffee shop behind. I had dropped the ultimate financial bombshell squarely into Trey's lap. He was a software sales director, a man whose career revolved around analyzing data, mitigating risk, and closing secure contracts. I knew exactly how his mind worked. He would not just take my word for it. He would investigate. He would pull public records. He would demand to see Savannah's credit report. And when he did, he would discover a terrifying mountain of hidden consumer debt, maxed-out retail cards, and a credit score so abysmally low it would disqualify her from a basic car loan. Savannah had spent years crafting the illusion of a wealthy heiress, but Trey was about to see the fraudulent math behind the magic trick. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, started the engine, and merged into the bustling Chicago traffic. The drive back to the suburban estate was peaceful. My mind was already categorizing the next phases of my extraction. I needed to separate my personal property from the items I planned to leave behind. I needed to finalize the off-market property transfer. The Vanguard Acquisition Syndicate had already responded to my encrypted email confirming their intense interest in the lot. They were aggressive, fast, and entirely ruthless. It was exactly the kind of corporate energy I needed to completely eradicate my family's suburban kingdom. I arrived at the estate and parked by the guest house. The main house was dead silent. Brenda and Savannah had likely retreated to lick their wounds and formulate a new narrative to explain away the disaster at the bridal boutique. I spent the remainder of the afternoon meticulously organizing my home office. I packed my sensitive financial documents, my passport, and my hard drives into a secure, fireproof briefcase. I did not touch a single piece of furniture. I had purchased every item in this guest house, but I no longer cared about material possessions. I cared about complete, unadulterated freedom. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting dark shadows across the manicured lawn. I poured myself a glass of red wine, sat at my kitchen island, and reviewed the final liquidation contract on my laptop. Everything was proceeding with perfect precision. At exactly 8 o'clock that night, my phone screen illuminated the dark kitchen. A text message notification popped up. It was a group message from Brenda, including Thomas and Savannah in the thread. I unlocked the screen, took a slow sip of my wine, and read the message. The sheer arrogance radiating from the text was almost comical. Gwen, the message began, dripping with passive-aggressive venom. Your father and I are utterly appalled by your vicious, toxic behavior today. You purposefully tried to ruin your sister's beautiful wedding experience out of pure malicious jealousy. Savannah is completely devastated. Her anxiety is through the roof because of your cruel ambush at the boutique. We absolutely refuse to let your bitter energy destroy this joyous season of her life. Therefore, your father and I are taking Savannah to a luxury resort in the Bahamas for the next 10 days. She deeply needs to decompress and heal from the emotional trauma you inflicted on her today. I scoffed, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of their reality. They were bankrupt. They had no cash. I knew exactly how they were funding this sudden, extravagant tropical escape. Thomas had one final high-interest credit line, hidden away a card he had desperately kept open by making minimum payments. He was maxing out his absolute last financial lifeline to buy first-class tickets and an all-inclusive resort package just to protect his golden child's fragile ego. They were literally financing their own destruction. I continued reading the second half of Brenda's message, where her tone shifted from protective mother to aggressive dictator. Our flight leaves tomorrow morning, the text commanded. We will be out of the country for 10 full days. We expect your cheap furniture, your miserable attitude, and every single trace of your existence to be completely gone from our property by the time we return. You are officially evicted. Do not attempt to contact us while we are trying to heal. Leave your keys on the kitchen counter. Goodbye, Gwen. I stared at the glowing screen, a genuine, delighted smile spreading across my face. I could not have engineered a more perfect scenario if I had tried. My family was voluntarily leaving the country. They were abandoning the estate for 10 solid days, leaving me with completely unrestricted, unmonitored access to the property. They were handing me the ultimate opportunity to execute the sale, strip the house, and orchestrate their absolute downfall without a single interruption. They thought they were punishing me with isolation. They had no idea they were simply giving the demolition crew a clear path. I set my wine glass down and typed my response. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not point out that they were legally incapable of evicting the actual owner of the property. I typed 4 simple words. Have a great trip. I hit send, silencing the thread immediately. The final trap was officially set. The next morning arrived with a bright, clear sky. I sat at my home office desk, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, watching a live aviation tracking application on my laptop screen. I watched the specific flight number my parents had booked taxi onto the runway at O'Hare International Airport. I watched the icon slowly accelerate and lift off the ground, heading south toward the Caribbean. Their plane was officially in the air. They were completely disconnected from the world, trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. Exactly 5 minutes after their flight status changed to departed, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel broke the silence of the suburban street. I stood up, walked to my front window and pulled back the blinds. A massive jet-black luxury sport utility vehicle with deeply tinted windows pulled smoothly into the sprawling driveway. The heavy doors opened in perfect synchronization. 3 men in sharp charcoal gray suits stepped out onto the pavement. They carried thick leather briefcases and exuded the cold, calculating energy of corporate predators. The real estate investors from Vanguard Acquisitions had arrived, and they were ready to buy the empire. I walked out of my guest house and approached the black sport utility vehicle, just as the 3 men reached the edge of the manicured lawn. The lead investor stepped forward, offering a firm professional handshake. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He had immediately began scanning the exterior of the property, calculating value, before we even exchanged a single pleasantry. I handed him a printed packet containing the verified deed, the latest property tax clearances, and the structural blueprints of the entire estate. I did not waste time with small talk. I simply turned and led them directly toward the grand entrance of the main house. I bypassed the decorative brass knocker and used my master key to unlock the heavy double doors. The house was completely silent, carrying the faint lingering scent of my mother's expensive floral perfume and the lemon polish the cleaning service used just yesterday. We stepped into the sprawling foyer. Mr. Harrison and his associates immediately noted the imported marble flooring and the custom sweeping staircase. I guided them into the primary living room. It was a massive sunken space featuring vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a breathtaking stone fireplace. Mr. Harrison praised the pristine condition of the crown molding and the flawless hardwood floors. I maintained a polite professional smile, highlighting the recent upgrades to the central heating and cooling systems. But my mind was playing a completely different reel of footage. Looking at the center of that immaculate living room, I did not see luxury. I saw the exact spot where Savannah stood on her 18th birthday, holding the keys to a brand new luxury convertible that my parents could not afford. I saw myself sitting quietly on the edge of the sofa, holding my college textbooks, listening to my father loudly declare that Savannah was the absolute pride of the family. I remembered my mother telling guests that I was just the reliable, boring older sister who would likely never amount to anything spectacular. Every square inch of this magnificent room was saturated with the toxic echo of their blatant favoritism. I pushed the memory down, gestured toward the custom built-in shelving, and smoothly redirected the investor's attention to the sheer square footage of the open floor plan. We moved seamlessly into the formal dining room. The space was dominated by a massive oak dining table positioned beneath a glittering crystal chandelier. One of the junior investors ran his hand approvingly along the custom wainscoting, noting the high-quality craftsmanship. I provided them with the exact dimensions of the room, ensuring they understood the premium value of the existing structure. Internally, a sharp, familiar pain flared in my chest. That oak table was not a place of family bonding. It was an execution block. I stared at the specific chair I had occupied for every single holiday dinner. I could almost hear the clinking of silverware and the sound of my mother's condescending voice bouncing off the high ceilings. That was the table where they mocked my decision to become a financial auditor, calling it a lifeless career for a lifeless woman. That was the table where my father repeatedly told me I lacked the charisma and brilliance necessary to carry the family legacy, completely unaware that my lifeless career would eventually be the only thing saving him from absolute bankruptcy and homelessness. The exquisite architectural details of the room meant absolutely nothing to me. It was simply a beautifully decorated torture chamber where they gathered to tear apart my self-esteem course by course. I maintained my absolute poker face, the same neutral expression I used when dismantling fraudulent corporate ledgers, ensuring the buyers saw only a rational seller. I led the men through the chef's kitchen, pointing out the commercial-grade appliances and the imported granite countertops. The pristine environment they admired was nothing more than a carefully constructed stage play, and I was finally bringing the curtain down. I opened the French doors, leading them out onto the expansive back patio. The property extended far beyond the main house, encompassing nearly 2 acres of perfectly maintained, highly coveted suburban land. The guest house sat quietly in the distance. The investors walked to the edge of the patio, their professional composure cracking just slightly as they took in the sheer size of the lot. They spoke to each other in hushed, rapid tones, pointing at property lines and checking the blueprints I had provided. Mr. Harrison turned back to face me. The predatory corporate glint in his eye was unmistakable. He was no longer looking at a family estate. He was looking at a massive financial goldmine. He walked back across the patio, closing the distance between us. He buttoned his suit jacket, signaling that the inspection phase was officially over and the aggressive negotiation was about to begin. Your documentation is flawless, and the property is in absolutely pristine condition. Mr. Harrison stated, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a man ready to drop a massive amount of cash. The structure itself is beautiful. However, we do not care about the house. The true value here is the double lot size and the prime zoning district. We are prepared to offer you a highly lucrative off-market cash deal today. But you need to understand our corporate strategy before you sign anything. If we buy this estate, we are going to bring in heavy machinery next week. We are going to completely bulldoze this beautiful home to the ground and build a complex of high-density luxury condominiums. He paused, studying my face with intense, calculating scrutiny to gauge my reaction to the impending destruction. He leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. My only question for you is this. Are you emotionally attached to the property? I am not emotionally attached to a single brick of this estate, I replied, maintaining unbroken eye contact with Mr. Harrison. In fact, bringing in a bulldozer and leveling this entire structure to the ground sounds like an absolute improvement. You can pave over the garden, tear down the main house, and pour all the concrete you want. My only concern is ensuring the financial transaction is swift and absolute. Mr. Harrison let out a sharp, approving bark of laughter. He clearly appreciated dealing with a strictly logical seller rather than a sentimental homeowner. He signaled to one of his associates, who immediately unlatched a heavy leather briefcase and withdrew a stack of preliminary purchase agreements. We are prepared to offer you $1 million in cash, Mr. Harrison stated, crossing his arms over his tailored suit. We can close the deal in 48 hours and waive all standard inspections. It is a highly competitive offer for an expedited off-market acquisition. I did not even look at the paperwork his associate was holding. I was a senior financial auditor. I knew the exact market value of the double lot, the premium zoning permits, and the aggressive profit margins. Vanguard Acquisitions stood to make on a high-density luxury condominium project. They were going to make tens of millions of dollars off this specific plot of land. 1.2 million. I countered, my voice completely devoid of hesitation. I am handing you a pristine, oversized lot in the most exclusive zip code of this suburb. There are no liens, no outstanding mortgages, and no legal entanglements on the deed. Most importantly, I am authorizing your legal team to execute an immediate, ruthless eviction of the current occupants. You will not have to negotiate a buyout to get them to leave quietly. You will pay $1.2 million and you will have full control of the property. Mr. Harrison studied me for a long, silent moment. He was calculating the sheer efficiency of the deal. No real estate agents, no commission fees, and no emotional delays. He extended his right hand. $1.2 million in cold hard cash, he agreed. We have a deal. I shook his hand firmly. Let us finalize the paperwork inside. I led the three corporate investors back into the main house, walking directly into the formal dining room. I directed them to set up their documents on the massive oak table. The sheer poetic justice of the moment was intoxicating. I was literally selling the family kingdom out from under them on the exact same piece of furniture where my parents had spent years systematically tearing down my self-worth. Mr. Harrison's lawyer spread the thick, dense legal contracts across the polished wood. They detailed the absolute transfer of the deed, the waiver of all property rights, and the immediate handover of the estate. I read through every single clause with the meticulous, highly trained eye of an auditor. The documents were ironclad. There were no loopholes, no grace periods, and no hidden liabilities. I picked up the silver pen resting on the table. It was the same brand of pen my father had aggressively shoved into my chest the night before when he demanded I sign away my guest house. I pressed the nib to the thick paper and signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes. With every signature, I severed another toxic tie to my past. I initialed the final page and pushed the stack of contracts back across the oak table. The property is legally yours, I stated. Mr. Harrison nodded to his financial officer. The man pulled out a secure tablet, entered a series of authorized passcodes, and initiated the wire transfer. I had explicitly instructed them to route the funds into an offshore trust account I had established months ago. I knew my family would inevitably try to sue me once they realized they were homeless. They would attempt to claim I stole the house from them, hoping to freeze my domestic assets during a lengthy court battle. But an offshore trust was entirely bulletproof. It was a financial fortress that my parents and their desperate cut-rate lawyers would never be able to touch. My phone vibrated in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and opened my secure banking application. I watched the screen refresh. A massive deposit of $1.2 million successfully cleared, sitting safely in my untouchable international account. The transaction was complete. The house where I had endured decades of emotional abuse no longer belonged to me. Mr. Harrison picked up the finalized contracts and slid them into his briefcase. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a separate bright red envelope. He handed it directly to me. As agreed, here is the legal mandate. Mr. Harrison explained, his tone shifting into pure aggressive corporate enforcement. This is a strict, immediate 30-day notice to quit. It applies to every single occupant currently residing on this property. Our legal department has already filed the duplicates with the local municipal court and the county sheriff office. There will be no extensions, no negotiations, and no mercy. When the 30 days expire, our security contractors will arrive with law enforcement to physically remove anyone still standing on this lot. I took the bright red envelope, feeling the heavy textured paper between my fingers. It was the ultimate eviction notice. My parents and Savannah had 10 days left on their luxury vacation in the Bahamas. By the time they returned, fully expecting to find me gone, their 30-day countdown would already be in the final terrifying stretch. They were going to come home to a legally mandated nightmare. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said, offering a genuinely satisfied smile. "Your team can begin the demolition exactly on schedule." I walked the investors to the front door, shook their hands one final time, and watched their black sport utility vehicle pull out of the driveway. I stood alone in the grand foyer of the massive empty house. The silence was absolute. The real estate transaction was perfectly executed, and my financial freedom was entirely secure. But my work here was not finished. The house was sold, but Savannah's extravagant, completely unfunded wedding still existed. I walked back to my guest house, stepped into my home office, and opened my locked filing cabinet. I bypassed the real estate folders and pulled out a thick, heavy leather binder. The gold-embossed letters on the spine read, "Savannah's Wedding Vendors." The gold-embossed letters on the spine read, "Savannah's Wedding Vendors." I flipped the heavy cover open. Inside, meticulously organized behind color-coded tabs, was the entire financial architecture of my sister's dream wedding. Every contract, every invoice, every payment schedule was filed with the exact precision I applied to my corporate audits. And on the bottom line of every single binding agreement, my name sat as the primary guarantor. My parents had been too proud to admit their bankruptcy to these high-end vendors, so they had manipulated me into co-signing and funding the initial deposits. They assumed I would simply roll over and pay the massive final balances when the time came. They had weaponized my good credit and stable income to build an illusion of wealth. Now I was going to weaponize my signature to tear that illusion down. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for the event director at the luxury venue where Savannah had planned her lavish reception. The director, a woman named Elise, answered on the second ring with her usual cheerful customer service voice. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I stated my name, referenced the specific contract number for the upcoming wedding, and formally requested an immediate total cancellation of the event. Elise gasped audibly over the phone line. She stammered, asking if there had been a sudden tragedy or a simple change of dates. I kept my voice entirely stripped of emotion, informing her that the wedding was permanently cancelled due to severe financial fraud on the part of the bride. Elise tried to protest, stating that she needed to speak with Savannah directly to confirm such a massive cancellation. I quickly reminded her of the contract terms. I pointed out page 4, section 2, which clearly designated the primary financial guarantor as the sole individual with the authority to modify or terminate the agreement. I told her that Savannah had no financial standing, no legal authority, and zero equity in the contract. I was the one holding the purse strings, so I was the one swinging the axe. I demanded she invoke the cancellation clause, retain the required minimum penalty fee, and immediately refund the remaining balance of my $15,000 deposit directly to my original payment method. Defeated by the harsh legal reality, Elise typed frantically on her keyboard. The venue was officially cancelled. I flipped to the next tab in the binder. The high-end floral boutique had demanded a $3,000 retainer for imported white orchids. I dialed the number. The owner answered excitedly, telling me that the rare orchids had just been secured from an overseas supplier. I cut him off smoothly and completely severed the contract. I cited the exact cancellation policy I had forced him to write into our initial agreement. He argued, raising his voice about the massive inconvenience, but I remained an immovable wall of corporate logic. I informed him that any further charges to my account would be reported to federal authorities as unauthorized theft. He slammed the phone down, but the cancellation email hit my inbox 2 minutes later. I moved down the list with systematic, ruthless efficiency. I called the luxury catering company that was preparing a $200 per plate menu featuring Wagyu beef and butter-poached lobster. I canceled the 12-piece live brass band that my parents had constantly bragged about to their country club friends. I canceled the custom wedding cake designer, the premium open bar service, and the luxury transportation company that was supposed to drive Savannah around the city in a vintage vehicle. With every single phone call, I systematically dismantled the extravagant fantasy they had built entirely on my back. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt the powerful, intoxicating rush of taking my life and my assets back. I sat back in my home office chair and watched my inbox flood with official cancellation notices. My banking application notified me of the incoming refunds. Thousands of dollars began flowing back into my secure offshore accounts. The deposits they thought they had permanently secured the money they believed I would never dare touch was fully reclaimed. Savannah's perfect high society wedding was completely annihilated. It no longer existed in any legal or physical capacity. It was nothing more than a stack of voided contracts sitting quietly on my desk. More than 1,000 miles away, the tropical sun beat down on a luxury resort in the Bahamas. Savannah was lounging on a plush white cabana bed, right next to a crystal-clear infinity pool. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding a frozen tropical cocktail, likely charging the expensive drink directly to my father's maxed-out credit card. She was completely relaxed, entirely convinced that she had won the family war. She believed I was back in Chicago, crying in the guest house, packing my cheap furniture and submitting to her absolute authority. Her phone rested on the small glass table beside her lounge chair. Suddenly, the screen illuminated. A sharp, loud notification chime broke the peaceful sound of the ocean waves. Savannah reached over lazily, picking up the device to check the message. She expected a text from a jealous friend or an excited wedding guest. Instead, she saw an automated email from the luxury venue with the word "cancelled" typed in bold red letters across the subject line. Before her brain could even process the impossible word, her phone chimed again, and again, and again. The chimes accelerated into a frantic, relentless chorus as an absolute avalanche of automated cancellation emails flooded her screen. The phone on my desk began to vibrate intensely, shattering the quiet focus of my home office. The caller ID flashed with Savannah's contact photo, followed by an international dialing code. I did not pick it up immediately. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, and simply watched the screen light up. I let it ring. I wanted her to sit in that agonizing, breathless panic on the other side of the ocean, staring at a barrage of cancellation emails while her frantic call went unanswered. I let it ring until it rolled over to voicemail. Less than 2 seconds later, the screen lit up again. She was aggressively redialing her desperation, manifesting through the digital network. I waited for the third consecutive ring before I calmly reached out and swiped the green accept button. I brought the phone to my ear, but I did not say hello. I let the silence hang, forcing her to speak first. "Gwen, what the hell is happening?" Savannah shrieked. Her voice was so high-pitched and shrill that the audio distorted through the small speaker. The ambient sound of the resort pool area and crashing ocean waves was completely drowned out by her sheer panic. My inbox is exploding. The venue just sent an automated message saying our entire reservation is voided. The florist sent a cancellation notice. The caterer sent a refund receipt. Tell me your bank accidentally flagged your card. Tell me this is just some massive stupid corporate glitch and you are fixing it right now. I listened to her hyperventilate. I could hear the absolute terror tearing through her vocal cords. She was not demanding an explanation with the arrogant authority she had weaponized at the restaurant. She was begging for a lifeline. Before I could even formulate a response, another voice cut through the international static. It was Brenda. My mother was screaming in the background, her words laced with absolute hysteria. "Give me the phone," Brenda yelled, snatching the device from Savannah. "Gwen, call your bank immediately. You triggered a massive fraud alert when you canceled that dress payment yesterday, and now your accounts are frozen. Call the venue director right this second and authorize the payments. You are embarrassing us in front of these luxury vendors. Fix this immediately, or your father is going to have a stroke." I sat perfectly still, absorbing their chaotic, unhinged energy. They still could not comprehend the reality of their situation. Even faced with absolute destruction, their entitled minds desperately clung to the delusion that this was simply a banking error. They fundamentally believed I was too weak, too obedient, and too heavily conditioned by their abuse to ever orchestrate a deliberate, calculated attack on their social standing. "There is no bank error, Mom," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human emotion. "The accounts are fully active and entirely secure. I personally called the event director. I personally called the florist. I contacted the caterer and the live band. I invoked the primary guarantor cancellation clause on every single contract. The wedding is officially canceled, and the remaining balances have been fully refunded directly into my private offshore accounts." The line went dead silent. The only sound transmitting from the Bahamas was the gentle mocking breeze of the tropical wind. It took several long, agonizing seconds for my words to penetrate their dense layers of suburban delusion. When the realization finally hit, the explosion was magnificent. "You canceled my wedding!" Savannah screamed, her voice cracking into a jagged, guttural sob. "You vindictive, psychotic monster. You cannot do this. Dad paid for this. Dad is the one hosting this wedding. You are just stealing his money to ruin my life. Your father has not had a single penny to his name in 6 years," I stated coldly, cutting through her hysterical sobbing with sharp, verifiable financial facts. "Your father is a bankrupt fraud. He is currently financing your luxury tropical vacation by maxing out his absolute last remaining high-interest credit line. He did not pay the venue. I paid the venue. I paid the caterer. I funded your entire royal fantasy, Savannah. You are nothing but a broke, unemployed fraud wearing designer sunglasses you cannot afford, living in a house you do not own." Brenda snatched the phone back, her voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of violent rage and sudden dawning terror. "Gwen, turn those contracts back on right now. You are going to put the deposits back. You are going to apologize to your sister. If you do not fix this by the time we fly home, your father will throw you out on the street. We will ruin you. We will take everything you have." "You cannot take anything from me, Mom," I replied, checking my watch to monitor my moving schedule, "because I already sold the house. I sold the main house, I sold the guest house, and I sold the land you walk on. I am leaving, and I am taking every single asset I own with me." The sound of Brenda hyperventilating echoed through the receiver. She was completely losing her grip on reality. Savannah was wailing uncontrollably in the background, screaming that her life was entirely over. They demanded answers. They demanded I stay on the line. They demanded my father be put on the phone to scream at me. They tried to bargain. They tried to threaten, and they tried to use the crushing weight of family guilt to drag me back into submission. I let them exhaust themselves, listening to the crumbling of an empire built entirely on my silent suffering. "Gwen, please," Savannah suddenly begged, her arrogant facade completely shattered. "Please do not do this. You are my sister. You have to fix this. Just tell me what you want me to do. Tell me what you want." I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute weight of 33 years of emotional abuse lift from my shoulders. I felt lighter, stronger, and infinitely powerful. I looked at the voided contracts sitting on my desk, then stared out the window at the quiet suburban street that I would never see again. "I am disappearing just like you wanted," I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a permanent sentence. "Enjoy the beach." I did not wait for her response. I pressed the red button on my screen and ended the call, severing the connection instantly. The silence in my home office was profound and beautiful. I knew they would immediately try to call back. I knew they would aggressively flood my inbox with threats and frantic apologies. I was not going to give them a single avenue of communication. I reached to the side of my phone and retrieved a small metal pin. I pressed the pin into the tiny hole on the edge of the device, popping the tray open. I extracted the small plastic SIM card. I held the tiny chip between my thumb and forefinger, feeling the delicate physical link to my toxic family. With a sharp, deliberate twist, I snapped the SIM card completely in half. I walked out of my home office, crossed the kitchen, and dropped the broken plastic pieces directly into the sink drain. I flipped the switch for the heavy-duty garbage disposal. The loud, grinding mechanical roar filled the room, shredding the plastic into fine dust and washing it down the pipes. Total, absolute radio silence was achieved. My family no longer had any way to reach me, leaving me perfectly undisturbed to execute the final phase of my quiet evacuation. The loud, grinding mechanical roar of the garbage disposal faded into a satisfying quiet hum as I flipped the switch off. My digital ties to my family were completely obliterated, shredded into fine plastic dust, and washed down the drain. I washed my hands, dried them on a fresh linen towel, and looked up at the digital wall clock. It was exactly 8 in the morning. Right on schedule, the heavy vibrating rumble of a commercial diesel engine echoed down the quiet suburban street, signaling the arrival of the final phase. I walked out to the sprawling driveway to greet the specialized white-glove moving crew I had contracted weeks in advance. A highly coordinated team of 6 men dressed in matching charcoal uniforms stepped out of the massive moving truck. The crew supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named David, approached me with a digital clipboard. I had paid an absolute premium for this specific team because they were known in corporate circles for their surgical efficiency, total discretion, and lightning speed. I signed his digital waiver and handed him a meticulously detailed manifest. I gave David one absolute rule for the operation. "We are clearing out the guest house completely," I instructed, keeping my voice crisp and authoritative. "In the main house, your team will extract only the specific appliances, electronics, and hardware listed on this manifest. Do not touch a single piece of clothing, do not move any personal photographs, and absolutely do not touch the cheap decorative furniture belonging to the other occupants. You take only the high-end hardware I have explicitly itemized." David gave a sharp nod, signaling his men to drop the truck ramp and begin the extraction. They started with the guest house. The crew moved like a highly synchronized military unit. My custom executive desk, my ergonomic office chair, the heavy bedroom furniture, and every piece of original art I had collected were quickly wrapped in thick protective blankets and loaded into the truck. I stood in the center of the space I had occupied for 6 years, watching my entire life being boxed up and carried away. There was no sadness in my chest. There was only the clinical satisfaction of a complex audit reaching its final, perfectly balanced conclusion. Within 2 hours, the guest house was completely barren. It was reduced to empty walls and bare floors, entirely stripped of the warmth and personality I had brought to it. Then we moved into the massive main house. This was where the true surgical extraction began. For 6 years, my parents had played the role of wealthy suburban aristocrats, hosting lavish dinner parties and impressing their country club friends with a house full of cutting-edge technology. They conveniently forgot that I was the one who funded every single piece of that technological facade. Now I was officially repossessing my investments. I led David and his team straight into the sprawling chef's kitchen. Brenda loved to show off the imported double-door smart refrigerator that featured an interactive digital screen and a built-in espresso machine. It cost $12,000, and the receipt was filed firmly under my name. "Unplug it," I ordered. The crew swiftly disconnected the massive unit, drained the water lines, and strapped it to a heavy-duty dolly. They rolled it right out the front door, leaving a gaping, dark hole in the middle of Brenda's immaculate custom cabinetry. I had them remove the commercial-grade wine cooler and the high-end smart oven. The kitchen instantly transformed from a modern culinary showcase into a gutted hollow shell. Next, we moved to the grand living room, the specific space where Thomas loved to host his important business associates to watch football games. He boasted endlessly about the custom home theater system, acting as if he had personally curated the audio engineering to match his refined tastes. The crew systematically dismantled the massive 85-inch OLED television from the wall mount, exposing the bare drywall behind it. They unspooled the hidden surround sound wires, removed the heavy subwoofers from the corners of the room, and boxed up the entire smart home integration hub. Without the glowing screens and the ambient audio, the grand living room felt incredibly cold and terribly empty. It felt exactly like the bankrupt reality my parents had been desperately trying to hide. I did not stop at the entertainment systems. I directed the moving crew to the perimeter of the estate and the internal hallways. I had originally purchased a state-of-the-art high-definition security system to protect my investment. My parents loved the status of the glowing security panels, but they did not own a single wire of the hardware. The moving crew went room to room, unscrewing the smart thermostats, detaching the doorbell cameras, and pulling down the internal motion sensors. I was literally plunging their suburban palace back into the dark ages. They would have no smart temperature control, no luxury appliances, and absolutely no security when they returned. Through it all, I adhered strictly to my own legal boundaries. I did not allow the movers to touch Savannah's overflowing closet of fast fashion dresses. I did not take Brenda's cheap, heavily perfumed throw pillows or Thomas's ridiculous collection of golf trophies. I left their personal junk exactly where it was. I wanted them to return to a house that highlighted the pathetic contrast between their actual possessions and the stolen luxury they had grown accustomed to. Their cheap belongings looked completely absurd sitting in the middle of a gutted mansion. By late afternoon, the massive moving truck was fully loaded and secured. I walked through the main house one final time, the sound of my heels echoing sharply against the bare hardwood floors. The silence in the estate was no longer peaceful. It was heavy echoing and profoundly desolate. The illusion of wealth had been completely dismantled, loaded onto a truck and scheduled for delivery to my new downtown penthouse. My parents were going to return from their tropical vacation to find their kingdom entirely stripped of its majesty. I walked out the front doors, pausing on the grand concrete porch. I pulled the heavy double doors shut, listening to the solid metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place. Since I had ordered the crew to remove the smart lock keypads, the doors could now only be opened from the outside with a physical key. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the only remaining master keys to the entire estate. I did not take them with me. I bent down, slid the heavy brass keys straight through the narrow mail slot at the bottom of the wooden door and let them drop onto the foyer floor inside. The keys hit the hardwood with a faint echoing clatter, locking the house completely from the inside out. I walked down the driveway, climbed into my luxury sedan, and drove away from my toxic family forever, leaving their dark, stripped, and utterly inaccessible fortress, waiting silently for their return. The drive into the heart of downtown Chicago felt like crossing the border into an entirely new reality. For 6 years, the commute to the suburbs had been a slow, suffocating descent into my family's toxic swamp. Now, watching the towering steel and glass skyscrapers rise up before me, I felt an electrifying rush of absolute liberation. The city was moving fast, vibrating with ambition and unapologetic energy. It was exactly where I belonged. I steered my luxury sedan into the exclusive underground parking garage of a premium high-rise building overlooking the river. The security detail recognized my vehicle, immediately waving me through to my reserved climate-controlled parking space. I parked the car, grabbed my fireproof briefcase, and walked toward the private residential elevator. I swiped my new encrypted access card. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in absolute privacy as the cabin shot smoothly up to the top floor. The doors opened directly into my stunning, ultra-modern penthouse. I had purchased this incredible piece of real estate completely in cash 7 months ago, right after closing a massive corporate audit. It was my ultimate exit strategy, a breathtaking sanctuary suspended high above the city noise. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Chicago skyline and the dark waters of Lake Michigan. The interior was a masterpiece of minimalist design, featuring dark hardwood floors, slate accent walls, and custom architectural lighting. It was everything my parents' desperate fake suburban palace tried to be, but this was entirely real, fully paid for, and 100% mine. David and his white glove moving crew had arrived shortly before me, using the designated freight elevator. They worked with the same surgical efficiency they had displayed at the old estate. My heavy executive desk was positioned perfectly in front of the skyline window in my new home office. The high-end smart refrigerator and commercial-grade wine cooler fit seamlessly into the custom cabinetry of the penthouse kitchen. The massive home theater system was mounted flawlessly against the slate wall in the primary living room. Within 3 hours, the crew had completely unpacked and arranged my entire life. I tipped David generously, shook his hand, and locked the heavy reinforced door behind them. I was finally alone in my true home. The silence here was different from the heavy, dead silence of the stripped suburban house. This silence was light, pure, and incredibly empowering. I walked into my new home office, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and opened my laptop. It was time to build the digital fortress around my new existence. I logged into my global banking portal and systematically changed every single password, security question, and two-factor authentication protocol. I scrubbed my old suburban address from every financial database, replacing it with a secure private mailbox service I had set up downtown. I completely severed any residual digital footprints that could ever link me back to Thomas, Brenda, or Savannah. Next, I opened my corporate auditing firm's human resources portal. I updated my primary residence and emergency contact information, explicitly instructing the security desk at my firm to deny entry to anyone attempting to visit me without a prior verified appointment. I specifically flagged the names of my parents and my sister, ensuring that even if they managed to track down my corporate headquarters, they would be immediately escorted off the premises by armed guards. My financial walls were impenetrable, and my physical safety was absolutely guaranteed. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and took a long, deep breath. The air in the penthouse felt crisp and clean. It was the undeniable air of absolute freedom. I walked into my new kitchen, opened the commercial wine cooler I had just repossessed from my mother, and poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine. I walked over to the massive windows and looked out at the glowing city grid. I had executed the perfect extraction. The property was sold. The eviction notice was filed. The wedding was utterly annihilated. My toxic family was currently thousands of miles away, trapped on an island, rapidly draining their last line of credit for a celebration that no longer existed. They thought they had punished me with their absence. They had no idea they had simply handed me the keys to their complete destruction. But as I stood there watching the city lights reflect off the dark glass, my mind briefly traveled back to the suburban estate. I thought about the very last action I took before I dropped the brass keys through the mail slot and walked away forever. The extraction of my appliances and the freezing of the wedding funds were calculated financial maneuvers. But I knew Savannah. I knew my mother. They needed a tangible physical representation of their absolute defeat. They needed something. They could touch something that would force them to look directly at the consequences of their own horrific behavior. I closed my eyes and let the memory of that final quiet moment wash over me. Before the moving truck pulled away, before I locked the front doors, I had walked back into the sprawling, gutted main house. The grand living room was stripped of its electronics. The kitchen was a dark, hollow shell. I walked slowly into the formal dining room, my heels echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. The massive oak table sat completely bare, looking pathetic and entirely abandoned. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a single perfectly square box. I had wrapped it meticulously in thick, pristine white paper, tying a flawless, shining silver ribbon around it. It looked exactly like a premium high society wedding present. I walked to the head of the oak table, the exact spot where Thomas always sat to deliver his arrogant speeches, and I gently placed the beautiful box right in the center of the bare wood. It sat there in the heavy silence, gleaming in the dim light of the empty room. I smoothed the silver ribbon, adjusting the presentation until it was absolutely perfect. It was a beautifully wrapped wedding gift, sitting in the heart of a barren house, waiting quietly like a ticking time bomb for the golden child to return. Trey stepped through the grand foyer, his heavy footsteps echoing against the bare hardwood floors. The stifling heat of the unconditioned house hit him immediately, but his eyes were locked on the chaotic scene unfolding in the formal dining room. He walked slowly toward the massive oak table, entirely bypassing a sobbing Brenda on the floor and completely ignoring Thomas, who was staring blankly at the wall in a state of absolute shock. Savannah stood frozen, her chest heaving as she watched her fiancé approach the scattered pile of devastating legal documents. Trey did not ask what was going on. He did not rush to comfort Savannah or help his future mother-in-law off the floor. He simply reached down and picked up the thick stack of papers resting beneath the framed calligraphy quote. His eyes scanned the heavy black text. He read the official deed of sale transferring the multi-million-dollar estate directly out of Gwen's name. He read the aggressive 30-day eviction notice from the corporate buyers. He flipped to the final pages, his gaze sweeping over the voided wedding contracts and the massive refund receipts showing exactly who had actually funded the extravagant lifestyle he was about to marry into. The truth settled over him with a heavy, suffocating finality. The wealthy, prestigious family he thought he was joining was nothing more than a hollow, bankrupt illusion built entirely on the back of a sister they treated like absolute garbage. Savannah panicked. She saw the terrifying realization hardening in Trey's eyes and immediately launched into an absolutely frantic, hysterical performance. She lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of his tailored suit jacket with trembling hands. "Trey, you cannot believe a single word written on those pages!" Savannah cried, her voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "Gwen is completely insane. She is a psychotic identity thief. She has been wildly jealous of our relationship since the day we met. She somehow hacked into my father's financial accounts, forged this entirely fake deed of sale, and fabricated these eviction notices just to terrify us. She canceled our wedding vendors out of pure, unadulterated spite because she is a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see me successful and happy. You have to believe me, Trey. She is just trying to ruin us because she is utterly obsessed with destroying my perfect life." Savannah squeezed his arms tightly, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. She fully expected him to wrap his arms around her and protect her from her evil older sister. She expected him to blindly validate her fabricated victimhood. Trey did not embrace her. He did not offer a single word of comfort or reassurance. He reached down and firmly detached her manicured fingers from his jacket, pushing her hands away with a slow, deliberate motion. His expression was not filled with fiery rage. It was filled with absolute chilling disgust. Without saying a word, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and slowly pulled out a single heavily folded piece of paper. Trey unfolded the thick sheet of paper and held it up to the harsh afternoon light streaming through the dusty dining room windows. It was a highly detailed, comprehensive financial background report. "I ran into your sister yesterday morning, right after your spectacular meltdown at the bridal boutique." Trey began, his voice terrifyingly calm and steady. "She gave me a single piece of advice. She told me to run a deep credit check before I ever signed a marriage license with you. I did not just run your credit, Savannah. I hired a private investigator. They pulled every single public financial record attached to your name and your parents' names." Savannah backed away, her hands flying to her mouth as the last remaining fragments of her carefully constructed illusion disintegrated completely. "You are $80,000 in secret credit card debt," Trey stated, reading directly from the professional report. "You have 0 verifiable assets. You do not own the luxury car you drive. Your parents do not own this massive estate. They have been completely bankrupt for 6 solid years. Every single dinner, every vacation, every designer dress, and every wedding deposit was funded exclusively by the sister you just tried to throw out on the street. You are not a wealthy heiress building a legacy. You are a financial parasite." Brenda let out another loud, pathetic wail from the floor, hiding her face in her hands. Thomas remained frozen, unable to conjure a single lie to combat the hard data firmly grasped in Trey's hand. "I can explain," Savannah gasped, her voice trembling violently as she stepped forward. "Trey, please, I just wanted to be perfect for you. I just wanted us to have a beautiful life together." You wanted me to blindly pay off your secret debts while you abused the only person actually supporting your entire family, Trey corrected sharply. I deal with enterprise software contracts and verified facts for a living. I do not marry frauds. The wedding is officially cancelled. Take off the ring. Savannah shook her head frantically, tears ruining her expensive makeup, but the absolute finality in Trey's dark eyes left her no room to negotiate. Sobbing uncontrollably, she slid the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger and held it out to him. Trey did not reach out to take it. He simply gestured toward the heavy oak table. Put it with the rest of your garbage, he ordered. Savannah dropped the diamond ring. It landed with a sharp clink directly on top of the bright red 30-day eviction notice. Trey turned his broad back on the weeping family and walked straight out the front door, letting it slam shut heavily behind him. Savannah collapsed to her knees, screaming his name as the sound of his powerful car engine roared to life and sped away down the driveway. Thomas finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. His face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate fury. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and frantically dialed 911. I am reporting a massive targeted theft, Thomas yelled into the receiver. The exact second the call connected, my daughter Gwen has forged a legal deed and stolen our residential estate. We need police here immediately to arrest her for grand larceny. The emergency dispatcher paused silently, pulling up the address in the municipal database. The response that came through the phone speaker was the absolute final nail in their suburban coffin. Sir, we cannot send officers for a theft report at that specific location, the dispatcher stated mechanically. Vanguard Acquisitions registered a fully legal transfer of deed for that exact property 3 hours ago. They also filed an official 30-day notice to quit with our local precinct for all current occupants. You are not the legal owners of that estate. If you refuse to vacate or cause any residential disturbance, the new corporate owners have fully authorized us to dispatch deputies to physically escort you off the premises. 30 days evaporated with merciless speed. My family spent the entire month trapped inside the sweltering, powerless, gutted mansion, desperately trying to find a high-priced lawyer willing to take their case pro bono. No one took the bait. The moment the local attorneys saw the ironclad Vanguard Acquisitions contract and my pristine offshore transfer records, they refused to return Thomas's frantic phone calls. The golden era of their suburban kingdom officially expired on a humid Tuesday morning. At exactly 8 o'clock, 3 county sheriff cruisers pulled into the sprawling driveway, their red and blue lights flashing bright against the pristine landscaping. Right behind them sat a massive yellow commercial bulldozer, idling aggressively on the curb. Vanguard Acquisitions was not interested in giving them a single minute of grace. The deputies marched up to the front porch, knocked loudly on the heavy double doors, and handed Thomas the final non-negotiable enforcement mandate. They had exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before the demolition crew started tearing the roof down. The social destruction was absolute and highly public. Brenda, Thomas, and Savannah were forced to drag their cheap imitation luxury furniture and overflowing trash bags of clothes directly onto the front lawn. The country club neighbors they had spent years trying to impress stood on their pristine porches, watching the spectacle unfold with barely concealed delight. Gossip spread through the exclusive zip code like wildfire. The prominent, wealthy family was exposed as completely bankrupt frauds, being physically removed by law enforcement. Brenda hid her face behind her designer sunglasses, weeping hysterically as a deputy ordered her to step off the grass. Savannah sat on a torn cardboard box, scrolling aimlessly through a phone that Trey no longer paid the bill for her perfect life, entirely reduced to rubble. With zero assets, terrible credit scores, and an active corporate eviction permanently staining their records, no reputable landlord would approve their rental applications. They were forced to pack their remaining junk into a rented moving van and drive to the absolute outer edge of the city. Their new home was a cramped, run-down 2-bedroom apartment situated over a noisy laundromat. The walls were thin, the appliances were rusted, and the reality of their self-inflicted poverty finally crashed down on them. They were completely broke, entirely humiliated, and utterly alone. But Thomas refused to accept defeat. Sitting in the cramped, poorly lit kitchen of their new miserable reality, His desperation mutated into a dangerous, blinding rage. He rummaged through a box of old mail he had hastily swept off the foyer table during the eviction. He tossed aside past-due credit card statements until he found a single glossy corporate holiday card.